You know, usually when we talk about history, there is this expectation of a finished product, like architecture, I guess.
Hmm.
You look at a towering skyscraper, and the historian just points and says, well, there it is. That is what they built.
Yeah, it feels very static, right? Like
Yeah.
it is totally complete. The glass is polished, the steel is set, and, it's comforting. We really like our history to be neatly packaged and categorized like that.
Right, totally. But then you step into the world of 19th century political philosophy, specifically, the origins of the ideological movements that completely fractured the 20th century, and suddenly that polished skyscraper just vanishes.
Oh, completely. It is gone.
Instead, you're standing in a room overflowing with 50 massive volumes of raw architectural blueprints. You are looking at this landscape of thought covered in erased lines, coffee stains, frantic scribbles in the margins, and just massive structural redesigns happening in real time.
It is the absolute definition of an intellectual construction site. I mean, it really is.
It is. And well, welcome to today's deep dive. We are taking on a truly monumental stack of material today for you, the listener. We are opening up the 50-volume collected works of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels.
50 volumes. It is just a staggering amount of text.
It's wild. This was a massive publishing project that took decades.
Yeah.
It was a huge collaboration among British, American, and Soviet scholars just to translate and publish the complete works, the letters, and all the rough drafts of these two men.
Yeah, and our mission today is to trace the evolution of their thought through all of that. We want to see how two young German guys went from, writing abstract philosophy to producing thousands of pages of economic theory and private correspondence that literally served as the blueprint for global revolutions.
Exactly. But before we get into it, I need to make something very clear right off the bat. Because these sources contain highly politically charged revolutionary content, this deep dive is going to be completely impartial.
Right, 100%.
We are not taking sides here. I want to clarify to you, the listener, that we are not endorsing the viewpoints of communism, socialism, or really any political ideology mentioned today, whether left-wing or right-wing. We are simply acting as your guides to objectively report and unpack the ideas exactly as they are contained in this original historical source material.
Yeah, we are doing this strictly as intellectual historians. We are just walking into this construction site to look at the blueprints, nothing more.
Exactly. We are looking at the raw mechanics of an ideology that quite literally split the world in two. So whether you view that resulting skyscraper as a monument or a monstrosity, our job today is just to read the blueprints. We are exploring the integrated body of philosophical, economic, and sociopolitical views they produced. Because regardless of your politics, you simply cannot understand the modern world without understanding the mechanics of what they were building.
No, you really can't. It is foundational to the 20th century.
So let's start at the very beginning. The late 1830s and early 1840s. What stands out immediately, and I found this fascinating, is that they did not start as a team. They were on two completely independent paths.
Right. Both men began their adult lives as freethinkers in Germany,
Yeah.
but they were looking at the world through very, very different lenses. Marx was deeply embedded in academia.
He was a library guy.
Oh, a total library guy. He was highly theoretical, analyzing the historical development of the state, writing a doctoral dissertation on ancient Greek philosophy. He was just obsessively studying the French Revolution and the English Revolution.
Okay, let's unpack this, because it sounds like we have a classic book smarts versus street smarts dynamic early on.
That is actually a really good way to put it.
Right, because you've got Marx buried deep in a library, wrestling with the dominant philosopher of the time, Georg Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel. And meanwhile, Engels is in Manchester, England, looking at the actual factories.
Yeah, Engels is right there in the smoke and the noise.
Yeah, exactly. He is analyzing the grim physical condition of the English working class based on his literal personal observations. So my question is, how do you get the guy reading Hegel in a quiet library to connect with the guy looking at soot-covered workers in an industrial textile mill?
Well, they collided because they both hit the exact same philosophical wall completely independently. But to understand that wall, we really have to talk about Hegel for a second.
Okay, lay some Hegel on us.
So, in the early 19th century, Hegel's philosophy was literally the air everyone in Germany breathed. You couldn't escape it. Hegel's idealism essentially argued that reality is shaped by the development of ideas.
Ideas first, reality second.
Exactly. History, according to Hegel, is driven by abstract concepts. The human mind, or what he called spirit, realizing itself over time. So things like institutions, states, and laws, those are just the physical manifestations of these evolving ideas.
So, if I'm understanding this, Hegel thinks ideas are basically in the driver's seat. It is like saying a massive tech company only exists because of the abstract spirit of innovation. The idea of the app creates the physical servers and the office buildings.
That is a great way to think about it. And Marx and Engels both looked at the real world and realized this was completely upside down.
The idea doesn't build the server farm.
Right. The physical reality of needing a server farm shapes the ideas. So they were deeply influenced by another philosopher, Ludwig Feuerbach, who popularized materialism.
Materialism.
Yeah, Feuerbach argued the exact opposite of Hegel. He said the material world is the primary reality, and our ideas, our religions, our philosophies, those are just reflections of that physical material reality.
Got it. So the physical server farm, the actual hardware, dictates what kind of software you can even dream up.
Precisely. But here's the thing. Even Feuerbach wasn't enough for them.
Really? Why not?
Because Feuerbach's materialism was totally static. It just said, hey, the physical world is real. It didn't account for how society changes, how history moves forward through struggle and conflict.
Ah, I see. It lacked the engine.
Right. It had no motion. So independently, Marx, through his grueling historical studies of how laws and states actually functioned, and Engels, through watching literal human beings getting chewed up by the machinery of early industrial capitalism, they arrived at the exact same conclusion.
Which was what?
They fused Hegel's idea of historical change with Feuerbach's materialism, and they both independently identified something no one else really had at the time. They realized the emergent industrial working class wasn't just this suffering group to be pitied.
They weren't just victims.
Exactly. They were the actual physical force that had the power to reshape the future.
Wow. It is like two scientists in completely different labs discovering the exact same chemical reaction on the exact same day.
It really is.
So it was only a matter of time before these two parallel tracks collided, and that collision finally happens in August 1844 in Paris.
Right. This is the historic meeting. This is the moment their lifelong friendship and this totally unique theoretical collaboration begins.
And what's wild is they don't just sit around congratulating each other on their shared brilliance. They immediately go on the offensive.
Oh, they come out swinging?
They start throwing intellectual punches? I mean, in their early collaborative works, stuff like The Holy Family and the German ideology, they are just ruthlessly dismantling their contemporaries.
They really are. They take no prisoners.
There's this whole group they mockingly call critical criticism, led by a guy named Bruno Bauer, and another movement they just call true socialism. It feels like they're deliberately clearing the ground. But why? Why were they so aggressive against people who were ostensibly on the same progressive side?
Well, because they believed their contemporaries were fundamentally misdiagnosing the problem. And if you misdiagnose the problem, you are going to build the wrong solutions.
Makes sense.
Take Bruno Bauer and the critical critics, for example. They believed that elite intellectuals, the critics, were the ones who drove history forward. They thought the masses were just a passive, unthinking herd.
Oh, wow. So Bauer is basically saying, we, the smart people in the Parisian cafes, are going to change the world, and the poor factory workers just need to sit down and listen to us.
Yes. That is exactly what they thought. And Marx and Engels found that incredibly arrogant, but also just completely detached from reality. They argued that it is the exact opposite.
Ideas don't change anything unless they grip the masses.
Precisely. The working class isn't a passive herd. They are the actual engine of history. And this is where they solidify what becomes known as historical materialism.
Historical materialism. Okay, let's break that down because it is a heavy term. But looking at the sources, it seems to be the absolute bedrock of everything they do for the next 50 years.
It really is a bedrock. If we connect this to the bigger picture, historical materialism is the theory that the way a society organizes its physical survival dictates everything else.
It's physical survival, like what?
Like how it produces food, shelter, tools, what they call the mode of production. That economic base dictates everything else about that society. Its laws, its art, its religion, its political system.
So the economy is the foundation of the house, and everything else is just the paint and the furniture.
Exactly. If you change the economic base, you change the entire superstructure of society.
Okay, let me make sure I have this. So if a society's economy is based on, say, lords owning land and serfs farming it, you get a political superstructure of kings and divine right and feudal laws.
Right.
But once the economic base shifts to factories and mass production and capitalism, the king becomes obsolete. You get a new superstructure based on parliaments, legal contracts, and private property rights.
You got it perfectly. And their joint efforts from that time forward were completely devoted to equipping the working class movement with this scientific understanding of history.
They wanted to give them the blueprint.
Exactly. They weren't just trying to interpret the world anymore in cafes. They were trying to build a practical political organization necessary to actually change it.
Which is a massive pivot. I mean, they go from being cafe critics in 1844 to actual organizers of an international movement. By 1847, looking at these volumes, they are writing rules and drafts of a communist confession of faith for a group called the Communist League.
Yeah, they are deep in the trenches of organizing.
Were they explicitly trying to turn this dense Hegelian philosophy into a practical weapon here?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, absolutely. They were equipping the working class movement with the scientific ideology necessary for what they saw as its historical mission, which was the overthrow of the bourgeoisie.
And that culminates in one of the most famous political documents ever written, right?
Yes, the manifesto. On the instructions of the Communist League, they take all those years of complex philosophical transition, all that study of the French Revolution and the English factory system, and they distill it into a programmatic statement.
The Manifesto of the Communist Party, published in 1848.
Right. But, as any architect will tell you, the blueprint looks great until you start digging the foundation and you hit a water main.
Oh, yeah. Theory meets reality.
Exactly. Just as they published the manifesto, Europe literally explodes into revolution. The timing is uncanny. Just as the ink dries in 1848, revolutions sweep across France, Germany, Italy, and the Austrian Empire.
Suddenly, all these theories they've been arguing about are put to the ultimate historical test. So what do? Do they just watch?
No way. They leave Paris, head back to Germany, and set up a radical newspaper, the Neue Rheinische Zeitung. They're trying to direct the activity of Communist League members, writing constant articles trying to rally revolutionary forces.
But it doesn't work out.
No, it doesn't. The revolutions fail, the monarchs regain control, the military crushes the uprisings, and the counter-revolutionary forces absolutely triumph.
Which has to be a devastating blow. I mean, if their theory was right, why did the revolutions fail so spectacularly?
Well, this is a crucial turning point in their lives and in their thinking. When the revolutionary tide ebbed, they were forced into exile, mostly in London. But they didn't abandon their worldview.
They doubled down.
They used the failure to deepen their worldview. They had to understand the actual mechanics of the failure. Why did the counter-revolution win?
Right. They had to do a post-mortem on the revolutions. And looking at volume 11, Marx writes a piece called The 18th Brumaire of Louis Bonaparte. He is analyzing how the revolution in France collapsed and actually led to a dictatorship. So what did he find? Why didn't the workers win in France?
What Marx realized was that the class dynamics were far more complex than just a simple two-sided war. In 1848, the working class and the middle class, the bourgeoisie, initially fought together. They both wanted to get rid of the old aristocracies and monarchs. They wanted democracy.
Okay, so they are on the same team at first.
At first. But as soon as the working class started demanding not just political rights, but it's economic rights, like better wages, shorter hours, control over workplaces, the middle class got absolutely terrified.
Ah, I see. The middle class realized, wait, if the workers get too much power, our private property and our businesses are at risk.
Exactly. The bourgeoisie became more scared of the working class than they were of the old kings. So they abandoned the revolution. They allied with the military and conservative forces to crush the workers. They prioritized the protection of their property over their own democratic ideals.
That is wild.
And in France, this huge vacuum of chaos allowed a populist authoritarian, Louis Bonaparte, who was Napoleon's nephew, to step in, promise stability, and literally crown himself emperor.
So Marx analyzed all of this to show that the state isn't some neutral referee holding the whistle. It is an instrument of class rule.
Right. The state apparatus exists to enforce the power of whoever controls the economy.
That is a pretty devastating realization. So they are sitting in London, exiled, completely broke, and watching reactionary winters just freeze over Europe. And to survive during the 1850s, they have to turn to journalism.
Yeah, they had to pay the rent somehow.
But they don't just write simple op-eds. They become heavy contributors to the American press, specifically the New York Daily Tribune. And here's where it gets really interesting for me. The scope of their journalism in the 1850s is staggering.
It is unbelievable how much they wrote.
For example, when a revolution breaks out in Spain in 1854, Marx doesn't just read a quick summary and write a hot take. He literally embarks on a study of the Spanish language and fills 5 entire notebooks with excerpts on Spanish history just so he can write accurate articles about the deep historical roots of the conflict.
He was a machine.
Mhm.
And Engels is doing the exact same thing regarding military science.
Right, Engels becomes the military guy.
Yeah, Engels realized that if future revolutions were going to succeed, the working class needed to understand armed struggle. So he totally immersed himself in studying the art of war. During the Crimean War in the mid-1850s, Engels wrote highly detailed analyses of the campaigns. He actually drew a physical map of the fortress of Kronstadt himself and made intricate sketches of troop positions.
Drawing maps of Kronstadt for a New York newspaper, I mean, that is dedication. But I have to push back here a little bit.
Okay, go for it.
How did they maintain their focus? Their core mission was the working class movement, right? The critique of capitalism. But here they are writing thousands of words about the Tsar of Russia, the British Whigs, the Ottoman Empire, and troop movements in the Crimea. Did they just get totally sidetracked by geopolitics?
It looks like a detour on the surface, but it really wasn't. They evaluated absolutely everything, every war, every diplomatic treaty, every election. They looked at it all through a single lens.
Which was?
How does this affect the prospect for a proletarian revolution?
So they're looking for the geopolitical cracks that could spark a domestic crisis back home.
Exactly. For instance, they saw Tsarist Russia as the ultimate boss-level threat to any revolution in Europe.
Why Russia?
Because Russia was the bulwark of feudal, absolutist reaction. Whenever a revolution broke out in Europe, the Tsar was always willing to send in the massive Russian army to crush it, just like he did in Hungary in 1849. So for Marx and Engels, the collapse of Tsarism was a necessary precondition for a working-class victory anywhere else in Europe.
That reframes everything. When they are analyzing the Crimean War, which was Britain and France fighting Russia, they aren't just giving play-by-play commentary. Marx relentlessly attacked the British ruling classes in his articles. He exposed the hypocrisy of British diplomacy.
Oh, he tore them apart.
He showed that Britain claimed to be defending the balance of power, but they were really just defending their own mercenary colonial interests in India and the Middle East against a rival empire.
They called it a sham war. They realized that Tsarist Russia, oligarchic Britain, and Bonapartist France, despite shooting at each other in the Crimea, all actually shared a counter-revolutionary position when it came to their own working classes.
So their journalism during these reactionary years was really a way to expose the underlying economic motives of global empires to a democratic public.
Yes, they were constantly trying to pull back the curtain.
But while this journalism is keeping them fed, barely, and keeping them engaged with global politics, Marx is simultaneously plunging back into the library to work on his absolute masterpiece. He decides he needs to look under the hood of capitalism itself. Which brings us to the late 1850s through the 1870s, where we get the heavy economic manuscripts.
The big ones.
Yeah, the Grundrisse, a contribution to the critique of political economy, theories of surplus value, and of course, the 3 volumes of Capital.
This is the core of his life's work. Marx undertook a massive historico-critical analysis of the political economists of his day, people like Adam Smith, David Ricardo, and Thomas Malthus.
I want to focus on this because this is where the real mechanics are. It is like Marx decided that observing the political events of the 1850s was just looking at the smoke coming out of an exhaust pipe.
Right. It doesn't tell you how the engine works.
Exactly. To really understand why society functioned the way it did, why there were booms and busts, wealth and extreme poverty, he had to reverse engineer the massive, complex machine of capitalism. He wanted to take apart the engine to see exactly how the pistons moved.
And the central piston of that engine, the mechanism he spent years trying to mathematically and philosophically prove, is the concept of surplus value.
Okay, let's slow down here. Pretend I am completely new to economics. I work a shift at a coffee shop. I get paid $10 an hour. Explain surplus value to me, because this is the concept that literally fueled 20th century labor movements. How does it work?
Okay, to understand surplus value, you have to understand a crucial distinction Marx made that earlier economists completely missed. And that is the difference between labor and labor power.
Labor versus labor power.
Yeah.
Okay.
When you get hired at the coffee shop, you aren't selling your actual labor. You aren't selling the specific cups of coffee you make. You are selling your labor power, which is your capacity to work for a set amount of time.
Okay, so I am renting my time and energy to the boss for, say, 8 hours.
Right. Now, in the capitalist system, labor power is treated as a commodity, just like coffee beans or milk or paper cups. And like any commodity, its value is determined by what it costs to produce and maintain it.
So what does it cost to keep me alive?
Exactly. What does it cost to keep you alive, housed, fed, and capable of showing up for your shift tomorrow?
Let's say, just for easy math, that costs $80 a day. So your boss pays you a wage of $80 for an 8-hour shift.
Sounds fair so far. I need $80 to live. He gives me $80.
But here's the trick of the engine. Human labor power is the only commodity in the world that has the unique ability to create more value than it costs to maintain itself.
Wait, how so? Well, during your 8-hour shift, you might generate enough value to cover your $80 wage in the first 4 hours of making coffees.
Oh, I see. By noon, I have made enough coffee to pay for my own daily survival.
Exactly. You've replaced your own value. But you don't get to go home at noon, do you?
Definitely not.
Because you sold your labor power for 8 hours. So for the next 4 hours, you continue to make coffee, generating another $80 of value. Those remaining 4 hours are what Marx called surplus labor. And the value created during that time is surplus value.
And I don't get a dime of it.
Not a single dime. It goes entirely to the capitalist who owns the coffee shop, the espresso machines, and the beans.
And that surplus value is the source of all profit.
Yes. Profit isn't generated by buying low and selling high in the market. Profit is generated at the point of production by systematically extracting unpaid labor from the worker.
That is mind-blowing when you think about it like that.
And Marx argued that this isn't an anomaly or a case of a bad, greedy boss. This is the fundamental mathematical law governing capitalist production. The capitalists must extract surplus value and constantly try to increase it by making you work faster or longer in order to survive against their own competitors.
This is why he spent years in the library of the British Museum, producing notebooks upon notebooks, tracing the disintegration of older economic theories. He accused earlier economists of practicing, what did he call it, vulgar political economy. What do you mean by that?
Vulgar political economy was Marx's term for economists who just described the surface-level phenomena of capitalism.
Like supply and demand?
Yeah, supply and demand, price fluctuations, interest rates. They described all that without ever analyzing the underlying social relations and the actual exploitation of labor. They treated capitalism as a natural, eternal law of nature, like gravity.
Like it has always been here and always will be.
Right. But Marx wanted to prove it was a specific historical phase, riddled with internal contradictions that would eventually tear it apart.
And what absolutely blows my mind is the timeline of all this.
Yeah.
He is doing this grueling, hyper-technical economic research. The manuscript of 1861 to 1863 alone ran to nearly 1,500 large pages.
It's a mountain of paper.
And he's doing this while simultaneously leading an international movement. I mean, in 1864, Marx and Engels become the key leaders of the International Working Men's Association, the first international.
It is staggering. They were laying the foundation for a global organization of workers. They were writing reports, drafting pamphlets, handling bitter disputes between different factions.
And then, in 1871, reality provides another massive test of their theories, the Paris Commune.
Yes, the Commune.
A working-class uprising takes over Paris and establishes a government for over 2 months.
It was the first time in history a working-class state was actually established.
Yeah.
And Marx immediately wrote the Civil War in France to analyze it. The Commune was absolutely crucial for them because it answered a question they hadn't fully resolved in their theory yet.
Which was what?
What does a working-class government actually look like in practice? They thought that the workers in Paris didn't just take over the existing capitalist state machinery.
They didn't just put new people in the old offices.
No, they didn't use the old police, the bureaucracy, the courts for their own purposes. They completely smashed that machinery and built something entirely new.
Like what?
A system based on direct democracy. Recallable delegates who were paid a regular worker's wage so no political elite could form, and the abolition of the standing army in favor of an armed populace.
Wow. They saw the commune as the living, breathing prototype of the dictatorship of the proletariat. But they are balancing this intense analysis of real-world uprisings with the daily leadership of the International, responding to strikes, fighting off anarchists within their own ranks, and trying to finish capital.
Yeah.
It is no wonder Marx's health started to fail.
The physical toll was just immense. He suffered from chronic carbuncles, liver issues, and brutal insomnia. His rapidly deteriorating health meant he couldn't finish the later volumes of Capital himself. He couldn't even finish reading the proofs for the third German edition of Volume 1.
That's so tragic.
He was often forced to leave London for medical treatment, separated from his library and his work. So after Marx's death in 1883, the burden of their shared intellectual empire fell entirely onto Engels' shoulders.
Which brings us to the 1880s and 90s, and section 5 of our dive. Engels has to take on the incredible task of not only finishing the editing of Marx's Capital from all those messy, rough drafts and handwriting no one else could read, but also acting as the ideological leader for a rapidly growing international socialist movement.
It was an unimaginable weight.
He writes a letter to August Bebel right after Marx dies, and he says, "For after all, we wish to maintain intact, insofar as it is in my power, the many threads from all over the world which spontaneously converged upon Marx's study."
He really felt the responsibility to keep the whole thing together. But Engels didn't just act as an editor. He wrote his own seminal works during this period that broadened historical materialism into entirely new fields, like natural science and anthropology.
Yeah, and one of the works that really stands out here is The Origin of the Family, Private Property, and the State. I noticed reading the source notes that he used the research of an American scientist, Lewis H. Morgan, who had spent years studying the life and customs of Native Americans. How does anthropology connect to Marxist economics?
Well, Engels saw that Morgan had independently discovered the materialist conception of history by looking at early human societies. By studying kinship structures, Engels argued that the nuclear family, patriarchy, and the state weren't natural, eternal fixtures of human biology.
They weren't just the default human setting.
Exactly. They emerged historically alongside the invention of agriculture and the emergence of private property.
Ah. Let me see if I follow. So when early humans started accumulating surplus wealth, like, herds of cattle or large plots of land, the men who owned that wealth wanted to ensure it was passed down to their legitimate heirs.
Right.
So they had to enforce strict monogamy on women to guarantee paternity, which overthrew the older, more egalitarian matriarchal structures.
Exactly. Engels called it the world historical defeat of the female sex. He tied the oppression of women directly to the rise of private property and class society. And because he proved these institutions had a historical beginning, he argued they would have a historical end.
Because anything that is built can be unbuilt.
Yes. He famously predicted that a future society, based on a free and equal association of producers, would put the whole machinery of the state into the, quote, Museum of Antiquities, by the side of the spinning wheel and the bronze axe.
The Museum of Antiquities. It is just an incredible image. But this brings up a really crucial question about Engels' role in these final years. Engels was the one who had to defend and systematize this worldview against reformists and critics. He wrote a book called Anti-Düring, which became one of his most popular writings. It was essentially a handbook of Marxism.
Yeah, a textbook, basically.
But when you systematize all these fluid, dynamic notebooks and intense debates into a neatism, do you lose something? I mean, did Engels' popularization change the nature of their original, more fluid ideas?
That is one of the most fiercely debated questions among historians. How do ideologies solidify? Anti-Düring arguably did more to popularize their worldview than Capital did during their lifetimes, precisely because it was accessible.
People could actually read it without needing a degree in Hegelian philosophy.
Exactly. But when you write a popular handbook, you inevitably have to synthesize and structure the ideas in a way that might iron out some of the complexities, the doubts, and the nuances found in the raw manuscripts. Engels was trying to equip a growing mass political party with a coherent, unified philosophy.
He needed a clear battle plan for them.
Right. And in doing so, he laid down the fundamental propositions of Marxism in a highly structured way, which some later critics argue became too rigid or too deterministic.
It is the difference between the messy, erased blueprints and the finished, polished skyscraper we talked about at the beginning. To truly understand how this massive body of work came together, you can't just read the published handbooks. You have to look behind the curtain at how these two men actually communicated day to day. And that is exactly what the final volumes of the collected works give us.
The epistolary legacy.
Yes. Volumes 38 through 50 consist of nearly 4,000 letters. It is the raw source code of their thought process.
3,957 letters, to be exact. It's amazing.
It really is. And what fascinates me is the sheer breadth of their interests. It is not just endless, dry talk about wages and strikes. They are polymaths. They are enthusiastically exchanging views on Charles Darwin's On the Origin of Species right after it was published in 1859.
Yeah, they saw Darwin's evolutionary theory as bearing out their own materialist dialectics in nature. It was proof for them.
Their curiosity was just boundless. The
Oh,
correspondence shows them reading biology by Thomas Henry Huxley. Marx was studying higher mathematics, literally trying to substantiate differential and integral calculus in terms of dialectics. They were discussing the history of languages, geology, and the state of the peasant commune in Russia.
they were trying to synthesize all human knowledge to understand the totality of the world.
Think about it like a lifelong two-person group chat where the greatest political theories of the 19th century were hashed out, critiqued, and refined in real time. You see Marx spitballing ideas for a critique of the German economist Friedrich List, or planning to start a library of the best foreign socialist writers, projects that never even materialized. You see all the false starts.
And crucially, you see the profound human element in these letters. The correspondence proves that you cannot separate their theoretical activity from their practical daily lives.
No, they were living it.
They wrote to each other almost daily when they were separated in the 1850s and 60s. The letters reflect the development of their theories, but they also show two men struggling to pay rent, dodging angry creditors, dealing with the tragic deaths of Marx's children, and just reacting to a rapidly changing world.
You read Engels' raw grief after Marx dies, writing that mankind is the poorer for the loss of, quote, the most important intellect which it could boast today. It really reminds you that behind these monumental, world-changing theories were just two guys deeply devoted to each other and their cause.
It is very moving, honestly.
It is. So let's step back and look at the whole 50-volume stack we've explored today. We have journeyed from two young German freethinkers wrestling with Hegelian philosophy to the architects of historical materialism and the manifesto of the Communist Party. We've seen them navigate the fires of the 1848 revolutions, survive the reactionary winter of the 1850s through obsessive investigative journalism, plunge into the deep mechanics of surplus value and capital, and finally, systematize their theories for a massive global movement.
It is just a staggering intellectual output. And what this English edition of the collected works provides is the full picture. Works that remained unfinished, articles that were never republished, and thousands of letters never before translated.
Which brings us to the ultimate question for you, the listener. Why should you care about a 50-volume set of 19th century writings? Because regardless of your personal politics or how you view the legacy of the governments that acted in their name, understanding the sheer depth, the relentless research, and the collaborative genius behind these volumes is absolutely essential.
You can't skip it.
You really can't. These aren't just old books. They are the literal blueprints of 20th century world history. You cannot understand the Cold War, the development of modern sociology, the history of the labor movement, or global geopolitics without understanding the ideas hammered out in these pages.
And there is one final, really fascinating thing to mull over. Many of the most profound works we discussed today, like Marx's massive 1,500-page Grundrisse manuscript, or their early philosophical breakthrough, the German ideology, were never actually published during their lifetime.
Yeah, they just sat in a drawer.
They were left, as Marx once famously joked, to the gnawing criticism of the mice. They were hidden in archives, only fully discovered, translated, and published decades after their deaths, well into the 20th century.
Which is an incredible thought to end on. Imagine finding the original, messy, complex blueprints to that massive historical skyscraper long after the building has already been constructed, long after millions of people are already living inside it. How might the history of the 20th century have been different if the world and the early political movements that acted in their name had read the full, nuanced, unedited thoughts of Marx and Engels as they were actually writing them, rather than discovering these hidden volumes decades later? It really makes you wonder how much of our world is shaped not just by what is written and published, but by the ideas left waiting in the drawer.